Thanks, Del. My name is Albert Garcia-Romeu. I'm a scientist at the Johns Hopkins Center for Psychedelic and Consciousness Research. Today I'll be talking about psilocybin use in the real world, crowdsourcing psychedelic research. Currently, we find ourselves in the middle of a psychedelic renaissance. Since the 1970s, there's been a large decrease in the number of scientific studies published about psilocybin and other psychedelics like LSD. However, we've seen an uptick since the middle of the 1990s and 2000s, where more and more research has been focusing on psilocybin and other psychedelics. One of the major sites for this research has been at Johns Hopkins, where since 1999, more than 10 human lab studies have administered psilocybin to diverse populations. We've given more than 600 doses of psilocybin to over 300 participants since 2000, and our study team now includes over a dozen researchers, psychologists, psychiatrists, pharmacologists, neuroscientists, and clinicians. We also have colleagues working on psychedelic research at institutions around the world, including University of Zurich, Imperial College London, NYU, and so forth. Much of this work has been funded to date by nonprofit organizations such as the Hefter Research Institute and the Beckley Foundation, and the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies. Last year, we were fortunate to open the Johns Hopkins Center for Psychedelic and Consciousness Research, thanks to the generous funding from donors such as the Stephen and Alexandra Cohen Foundation, Tim Ferriss, and his colleagues. And here's a photo from right around the time when we established the center, and our group has since grown, so we'll have to update this. But around the late 2018, we were approached by the folks at Unlimited Sciences, including Del, David Champion, and Heather Jackson. And they wanted to talk about starting a new online survey study. Crowdsourcing research using online studies is a great way to collect data from a large number of people relatively quickly and inexpensively compared to clinical or human lab studies. We know that lots of people are using psychedelics like psilocybin outside of these lab settings, and we feel like we can learn a lot from these experiences. These survey studies allow us to focus investigations on specific questions, like what are challenging psilocybin experiences like and what are their impact? What's the impact of psychedelic use on anxiety or depression? How does psychedelic use impact recovery from various addictions, and even stuff like DMT entity experiences? We published several of these types of cross-sectional surveys, including this survey of challenging psilocybin experiences, where almost 2,000 people told us about their most challenging or difficult psilocybin experience. We found a lot of important takeaways, but among them, about 11% did something during that experience that put themselves or others at risk of harm, and even some people ended up behaving in physically aggressive or violent ways. However, luckily, the majority of these people, about 84% of them, endorsed benefiting from the experience in the long term. Similarly, with my colleagues Alan Davis, Earth and Fire Arrowwood, Dr. Griffiths, and Matt Johnson, we recently published a survey of study of people who reduced their cannabis, opioid, and stimulant misuse after using psychedelics outside of the laboratory. We heard from over 400 people who said that they had had an experience using LSD or psilocybin, followed by a significant reduction in drug misuse. Some of the data there showed that whereas 96% of those people met a substance use disorder criteria before the psychedelic experience, only 27% met substance use disorder criteria afterwards, which suggests, in line with much other research, that psychedelics have a very prominent potential for addiction treatment. These online studies are limited, though, because it can be difficult or impossible to verify key factors like the truthfulness of responses or things like drug dose. Of course, there's also participant self-selection and other types of bias when people are doing these things retrospectively. That's a big thing to keep in mind when we're talking about cross-sectional studies like the ones I just talked about, which provide a snapshot of past events versus longitudinal studies that follow people over time and can be more like a series of before and after photos. Neither of these can really address causality, prevalence, or efficacy of psychedelics in a robust way which necessitate clinical or human lab studies, but they can provide important and useful data for further research. Towards that end, researchers have been working on building and designing survey and online studies that are longitudinal in design. This one was done by our colleagues at the Imperial College London, looking at when people use psychedelics, what outcomes do they report. This study followed people from 1 week before their psychedelic use to the day before a psychedelic experience. Then they tracked them the day after, 2 weeks, and up to 4 weeks after. And you can see we have a sample ranging from 654 to 212 people. And what they found in that study was that psychological well-being was increased 2 and 4 weeks after psychedelic use. Greater mystical effects had a positive effect on change in well-being, and baseline traits, so traits measured on the day, a week before psychedelic use, were strongly predictive of changes in well-being after the psychedelic experience. In line with that type of longitudinal design, we've decided to come up with a similar study where we would expand on those findings and enroll hopefully a larger number of people. We're doing that study in collaboration with Unlimited Sciences, who's a study sponsor. And we're currently enrolling participants who are 18 years or older, English speaking, and planning to use psilocybin sometime in the next few months. We need people who would be willing to fill out surveys, up to 6 surveys before and after psilocybin use. And you can find more information about the study here at the hopkinspsychedelic.org website or the Unlimited Sciences websites. We launched this study on August 21st, 2020, so it's been just about 2 months now since we started, and currently we have over 2,400 people enrolled and have collected data in the 2-week pre-session survey from 787 people. We also collect data on the session day itself when people are going to use psychedelics, or psilocybin rather, but right before they use, from 452 people. We collect data 1 to 3 days after psilocybin use, which we've now gotten from 362 people. And we have follow-up surveys about 2 weeks and 2 months after psilocybin use. And as you can see, we haven't gotten very far since not many people have made it here yet, but we have collected 2-week post-session survey data from about 212 people to date. I'm going to share now some of our preliminary findings, which we have not yet shown anyone, so this is exciting for us. But our basic demographics from the initial consent survey with 2,453 participants show a mean age of about 35 years old, mostly male population of 62%, mostly Caucasian population of 76%, and we'd really like to change that. So to the extent you're able, if you're minority or person of color or any other LGBTQ or minority population, we'd really love to have your input and have you enrolled in the study. In terms of education, we have a fairly educated sample with many of them having bachelor's degree or at least some college, as well as a majority population in the United States. So about 74% of them are residing in the US currently. We had a mix of mental health conditions. So 31% of participants said they had a current anxiety disorder. About 26% said they had a current mood disorder. A smaller number, about 8%, had chronic pain. And about 34% of these participants said they had no mental health conditions currently. When probing about the reasons for psilocybin use, the number one answer at this point was self-exploration. So we had 45% of the population saying that that was their main reason for use. We also had about a quarter of participants saying they're using for mental health reasons. Data from our 2-week pre-session survey show that about 12% of the respondents were first-time psychedelic users. So this is exciting because we'll be able to actually track these people in a way that we haven't done before. And hopefully we'll have more of those folks signing up soon. The rest of the people who had prior experience with psilocybin or other psychedelics had an average number of lifetime psilocybin uses of about 15. The majority of the sample was also caffeine using regularly, about 74%. About half used cannabis regularly, about 56% of them. About a third were using alcohol regularly, 36%, and about a quarter used tobacco or nicotine regularly, about 23%. A small number, 7%, said they had no other drug use aside from psilocybin. And many of our participants were either full-time employed, about 50%, or part-time. So the day of the psilocybin use, but directly before ingesting any substance, we ask a few questions. We currently have 452 participants who have answered this survey. And at the moment, our mean reported dose is about 3.1 grams of psilocybin. We asked people if they set an intention, and about 74% of them said they had. They had set the intention beforehand. This is an example of one of the participants' responses of their intention. My intention is to better understand how I can help the world, be productive, and to relieve day-to-day anxiety. We also had 33% report that a sitter will be present during the session. After the psilocybin session, we take another survey, which we've now had 362 responses for, and found out that of the people who filled it out, 44% did their journey alone, while another 30% did their psilocybin journey with friends who were also using psilocybin. Most of these sessions took place at home, so that's 70%, but we also had a good number that occurred outdoors in nature, about 21%. When asking the day after their journey how people felt about it, 50% rated as extremely positive, and only 3% rated it negative in any way. However, 4% of the participants who responded here did say they sought medical or psychological treatment either during or after the session. This is an example of some of the rich qualitative data that we're also getting as people provide us session narratives or short summaries of their experience. For instance, one person said their session included a flood of unpleasant emotions that have built up over the years, as I always try to bury them and put on my happy face. The emotional dam broke during my session and they all came pouring out. I felt sadness, depression, fear, anxiety, and more, all in rapid succession. When it was over, I felt emotional vulnerability that slowly gave way to calm and peace. This was possibly the most therapeutic session that I've ever had. So as you can see, we'll be getting a lot of data in addition to the numbers and percentages that I'm presenting now. At the 2-week post-survey, we now have 212 responses, and a summary of what we've found so far is that 32% rated their psilocybin experience as among the top 10 most meaningful life experiences. 36% rated it as among the top 10 most insightful life experiences, and about 15% rated it as among the top 10 most challenging or difficult life experiences that they've had. 90% considered the experience to create a positive change in well-being or life satisfaction. We also had smaller numbers of 8% who said no change in their life satisfaction or well-being, and 2% who cited negative changes. Most people, about 86%, reported no persisting negative effects, which is good news. However, we did get smaller numbers, about 6% who reported mood fluctuations, and 4% who reported depressive notions as well after their sessions. In terms of other changes that people reported, we had about 57% talking about improved relationships that they attributed to their psilocybin sessions, improvements in their career and work life in about 33% of them, and increased physical activity in about 33% of respondents. Importantly, 19% reported that there were no notable changes in behavior. Comparing data from before and after the psilocybin session, we took a look at some of the 2-week pre-session data and the 2-week post-session data to see if there were any changes in certain measures. We found statistically significant results in our preliminary data for all of these measures, including quality of life, physical health, and social function, where mean ratings went from good to very good, as well as improvements in mental health, relationships, and fatigue, where scores show a change in the right direction, but we're not quite good enough to reach this very good level. Similar with fatigue, which was rated as mild before and after, but with lower numbers. And with anxiety and depression ratings, we had the ratings improved from sometimes to rarely, and with burnout from sometimes to seldom. So you can see again that these are all statistically significant decreases or increases in a positive direction for a number of different health outcomes that we'll be continuing to track throughout the study. It's very important to note these findings are still preliminary. Anything that I'm mentioning today will look different tomorrow, and we'll be continuing to collect data through at least the end of next year. So if people are interested in signing up and providing data, we'd be happy to have them. And again, it's difficult or impossible to verify some of the factors that we're assessing here. And there's also, of course, a risk of bias. Nevertheless, our future directions with this work will be to start looking at teasing apart questions like, how do personality, set, and setting before the session impact the actual drug effects during the session? And how do the drug effects during the session also impact outcomes such as cognitive flexibility, emotional regulation, anxiety, depression, substance use, pain, and burnout, where people might be acting in risky ways, so we can try to help improve safety around psilocybin use. And all of this work will potentially serve as novel targets for more research. So to wrap up, I just would like to thank Unlimited Sciences and the team there who have helped us facilitate this work, design it, and build it out, especially Alex Edwards and Hillary Jackson, who have done a lot of the heavy lifting for the survey itself. If any of you have questions regarding this study or any of our work at Johns Hopkins Center for Psychedelic and Consciousness Research, you can contact me directly at my email, which is here at the bottom of the slide. Thanks very much for your attention, and thanks to the organizers of the PsyTech Summit. It's a pleasure to be here, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the summit.